Hello, hello, hello. Where am I? There I am. Ooh wee. Hair's looking strong. Let's do this. Good morning, good morning. How is everybody? Today, look good, feel good. I'm gonna get my stuff organized here a little bit. All right. All right. I'm gonna get myself going. I hope that your day is going great. It is morning times here. This is 10 a.m. Pacific time. My name is Aaron from Albatross Academy. And what I do here at Albatross Academy is I help homeowners navigate their construction projects. And it is the joy of my life besides my wife and my children. I love to do it. And one of the things that I get to do, I'm also a bit of background about me. I have held nearly every job in this industry. I've been on the tools as a carpenter. I have been a construction estimator. I've been a project manager, project coordinator. I am currently a professor at a couple different post-secondary institutions, universities, and I also, obviously Albatross Academy. So that's kind of what I do, and what the purpose is. If you've never viewed any of these live streams before, is basically it's a chance for me to answer any viewer questions that have trickled in during the week, and it's also a chance for me to I generally will chat with talk about a couple topics, at least a few, probably 3, 4, 5, 6 different topics. Sometimes they are burning questions that viewers have been dying to know, like, what's my shoe size? Nobody's ever asked that. I think they know. And but generally speaking, these are questions that are pertinent to the industry right now, and that are pertinent to people looking to build custom homes or do major renovations. I also have a design business as well, I should mention, called Albatross Design and Draft, and a number of projects going on currently, so I'm a busy fella. So a couple things that we are going to talk about today. We're going to talk, number one, we're going to talk about tariffs. This is whether you're in Canada or America or the UK or Europe, this is a global issue right now, and we're going to take a look at how it has affected the lumber industry and how it is likely to affect the construction industry. I'm speaking specifically on Canadian softwood lumber, though there are tariffs that, like on aluminum, that are certainly impactful. But we're going to focus primarily on lumber. And so I am, full disclosure, located in Canada, and there have been a number of tariffs going sort of in both directions. But one thing that I want to be really clear about, and we'll in a little bit in a way, we're going to revisit what happened during COVID, because what happened during COVID from a lumber perspective and a supply perspective is in a way very similar to what's happening now, and we'll see how people managed that, and how they dealt with it, and what are things that we maybe can do to deal with it ourselves. So that's one thing we're going to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about the Build Canada Homes. That's the Build Canada Homes Act, which is something put in place by the federal government here in Canada. And we'll talk a little bit about housing starts versus reality, which is really, I think, an interesting discussion. We're going to do a little bit of development charge relief. This is somewhat of a local issue in the local British Columbia, Western Canada. And then we are definitely going to get into a couple case studies from bad contractors. These are my favorite things to do, not because they bring me joy, but because I feel they are the most useful in terms of helping people prepare themselves and giving people a little bit more information or transformation to help them on that journey of building a custom home or doing a major renovation, because those are tricky tricky to navigate. So first thing we're going to talk about is the tariffs and what that means for us. So we are looking at, where am I here? All right. So we are looking at, currently I believe it is a 45, it's a 45% tariff, 45.16. U.S. import taxes on Canadian softwood lumber now total 45.16 on most Canadian producers. So what that means is that Canadian contractors are suddenly seeing material cost swings that make the fixed price quotes and project timelines difficult to hold. So your audience, that's you guys, we're going to talk about how that's going to affect what is going on in the custom home world. So we're going to talk about, the tariffs. What happened? So basically, I mean, what we can look at is what happened in COVID. And in COVID, what ended up happening is, because, as you know, everything got shut down, but certainly supply streams, there were interruptions. My goodness, excuse me. There were interruptions in the supply stream, specifically with lumber. And what ended up happening was that essentially the demand was still high. People were still building. Actually, I had a project that had just started in the February of COVID. COVID, of course, the shutdown started in March, and in February of COVID, I had a project that started, and it turned out to be the best possible time to build a home, because the pricing increases hadn't hit yet. That would come later in the year. And so many jobs were shut down just for precautionary reasons. So if you were building a custom home, and if you were doing a smaller job and you had your people in place already, they generally still wanted to work, especially if they were able to. And what ended up happening was all the trades were available. All the trades were pricing pretty aggressively because they weren't sure if they were going to be working anymore after this. So they wanted to make sure they were getting the job. Lumber and materials the supply hadn't fully thinned out yet, and the demand was still high. So demand actually dropped a little bit. So the supply and demand cycles were a little bit, the demand was interrupted. So what ended up happening was that it became the perfect time to build, and it was seamless. And so the project, it was I'll say 2,100 square feet of living space and probably 700 square foot garage, a big garage. And they started early February, and they were in by August 31st. So that's 8 months, pretty much 8.5 months for a full custom build. And I mean, is one level, but it was just, I mean, the build couldn't have gone any better. But what ended up happening later that year was, of course, that the supply chain was drastically interrupted due to COVID and shutdowns, and the demand was still pretty high as people wanted to keep their projects going. So lumber prices went through the roof. So before COVID, in my local hardware store, a 7/16 or half-inch sheet of OSB, oriented strand board, which looks like plywood, but it's made of chips if you've never seen it before, and they're glued together. And a half-inch sheet of OSB was $25, and at the peak of COVID, it was $75. So building got really, really expensive. I know because I was building my carriage house and my guest house at the time also, and it got really, really expensive. And what ended up happening was some projects got put on hold. Some projects kept going, thinking that things were going to level out. But what's happening right now, I have a client that they have a major tenant. They have a commercial or industrial lease, and they have a major tenant that is a Canadian lumber producer. And I mean, this, in a way, that when the tariffs came into effect, there's a trickle-down effect that I don't think people fully realize or fully think about. Maybe they know, but they don't really think about how it affects things. So when the tariffs first came in, the softwood lumber producers, they got really, really gun shy, and they started to in some way drop production, but they started to really, collect their purse strings, so to speak. And so my client, who held the lease options for this industrial manufacturer, the industrial manufacturer said, look, they said to my client, their landlord, they said, well, we're not going to be able to make rent. We're cutting by 25% right now. Because their main export was to the States. And they said, well, we're going to cut by 25% right now. And we need a break on the rent, or we're out and we can't stay in business. So the project that I was working on for my clients, the landlord, essentially got shelved and eventually scrapped. So all of this little trickle down, because my clients didn't want to take on any extra expenditure because they weren't sure about the rent that they were going to be pulling in. So this trickle down effect, I thought, well, tariffs aren't going to really affect me. I'm just a small time designer. And what ended up happening was it absolutely affected me. A project got shelved. Now, I had already done most of my work, so it wasn't the end of the world for me. But it certainly impacted me, and it certainly impacted my clients. So where this gets really, really sticky, and this happened in COVID, is when you are pre-selling units. When you're let's say you pre-sell a unit for, let's say it's a condo or maybe a townhouse. Let's say a low-rise townhouse, and you're pre-selling it for $750,000. Let's say your cost is going to be about $600,000 for that. You're a developer. Let's say the cost is going to be $600,000. Now, what ends up happening is, like in COVID, when these tariffs come in, they, by osmosis, affect the price of lumber. And as lumber goes up, the margins start to shrink, and definitely as not only lumber comes up, but any other tariffs that affect any other goods and trades between countries, and the supply chain. Much like COVID, if the supply chain is interrupted or is affected, it affects things far, far, way, way, way down the line. So say for something like what's going on right now with the fuel surcharge, how gas prices have gone through the roof and fuel prices have gone through the roof. So the trickle-down effect is that later on, because we're taking down our current reserves right now, our fuel reserves, so we haven't even hit the low point yet of the production. I think they're saying that's going to come a year or maybe less down the road. But what it means is that it's not that it's, if you're pre-selling units and the supply chain is interrupted, then your margins might start to shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. And this happened during COVID. Not sure if it's going to happen here quite yet, but this happened during COVID, where it became not viable for developers to build the buildings that they had already previously sold. And of course, they've bought the land, they've paid they would have paid the design and development team to develop that. And now they can't develop the buildings because they will go under. And many of them did go under. And they've already sold. That's the danger of pre-selling. Now, pre-selling is great from a financial perspective if your pricing holds, because you are essentially playing with house money. You're getting people to give you money, and you're building the building with that money. So you're preloading your debit card, so to speak, and then you're building the building with that. And of course, anything beyond that is going to be gravy. So the tariff effect that may have is that we may see fixed price quotes get canceled, or what ended up happening in COVID was that fixed price quotes that are normally good for 30 days may now be good for, say, 7 if the market starts to get volatile. So with COVID, if you got, say, a lumber package or you got a truss package, they would say quoting this pricing is good for 7 days. That's as long as they would hold pricing for. Now, normally it's 30 days because there's a certain amount of stability in the market that will dictate how long they're able to hold pricing for. So what may in fact happen is with these tariffs and maybe especially with this fuel debacle that's happening right now in the Strait of Hormuz, is that it may end up affecting the timing of your contracts. It may affect the timing of your build. It may affect the contingency. It may affect your ability to get certain products if shipping starts to get really, really expensive, which it will. So the effect of tariffs are really, if more farther reaching than just that specific commodity that the tariff is being levied on. So that's one thing that we should definitely keep an eye on, and especially if units are pre-sold, then we may start to see developers either abandon projects or go under themselves. So next thing we're going to talk about is the Build Canada Homes Act. So this is something that's enacted by Canadian government, establishing it as a crown corporation. And Build Canada Homes Act. And what it is a really, really hard push by the federal government to get more and more housing. Now, we typically see this in housing. We typically see these wild swings, both in Canada and the States, where we'll see all of a sudden we'll have, be it immigration or maybe a population boom, a miniature population boom, or, I mean, those are two of the primary ways that countries grow, or a migration within certain areas, within certain regions, where we'll see a housing shortage. And when the housing shortage happens, sometimes if it gets bad enough, the government will swing wildly in the other direction, and they will immediately subsidize the Build Canada, or they'll subsidize a Building Homes Act to make it easier and more affordable for both regular people and developers to build units. And they will focus on high density. Oftentimes municipalities will focus on high density urban areas and densifying the downtown core rather to try to maybe minimize urban sprawl. So what ends up happening here is, and that's exactly what's happening now, is that there are these wild swings. And so what's going to happen now, because we've already seen the vacancy rate rising in my area, and we're already seeing major development in my area, in my region. And what that means is that there's going to be an oversaturation in the market of units. And I couldn't tell you exactly when it's coming, but it's definitely coming in the next few years, where we're going to see an oversaturation where developers are going to be building, but they're going to be building for no one. And I mean, that's maybe a bit extreme, but they're going to be building for the buyers that just aren't there. And the danger in when you're developing is that you're building for a market that is no longer there. So if people that don't have homes are lower income people, then they're not going to be able to afford. The developers are trying to make money on their builds, of course, and they're not going to be able to afford what people aren't going to be able to afford what developers are asking. So developers are then going to have to switch to a different model. Some of them are switching to a renter versus selling the units, which is less desirable for a developer. You don't really want to be a landlord over outright selling the units. Then you can take the profit and do another one. A landlord, your money's tied up in there for a lot longer. So it means that there's a federal push also toward modular and prefab construction, and what that means for the custom home market. Now, this is a super interesting, chat discussion, because what it means. I had a discussion with my client yesterday, 2 days ago, about this. They were going to look into doing a custom home, and they looked into it, and you can get, and newer prefab and modular units are being companies have come out, and they can do what looks to be like custom designs, and you do have some level of customization in these. And a federal push towards modular and prefab construction means that people are going to be able to get that new looking, feeling building, and they don't have to pay custom home prices for it. Now, they're going to lose, of course, they're going to lose some customization, but they may not lose that much. So what it's going to do is make the custom home market more and more competitive. And people are going to say, well, wait a second, because in the old days, but let's say 5-10 years ago, if you're buying a modular building, you're generally speaking, you're going to be buying something that is constructed somewhat poorly. They generally, modular homes, depending on the units, they don't have to conform to building code because it's a product. It's a product in and of itself, and they're not fixed to the ground. So generally speaking, they don't have to conform to building code. So what you see is 2x4 walls with minimal insulation. Now, they'll have some insulation in there, but it might be an R12 wall. And you're going to see huge spikes in energy usage, in colder winter months. And generally, they're not that well put together. Well, now that's changing. And prefab, especially, can be wonderfully, like a SIPS panels, structural insulated panels. They can be really, really high-performing buildings. And the push toward modular and prefab construction, I think, is both good and bad for the custom home building industry. It's going to force us to adapt. It's going to force us to really sharpen our pencils and really hone in on what makes us good. What do we offer that a prefab and a modular unit can't? And we're going to have to. Sometimes I firmly believe that the competition is good, and if it eases that housing crisis too, then that's good. How is that going to affect trade availability, lot pricing, and builder capacity? Well, like most things, competition means that the cream will rise to the top, and as my father would say, separate the wheat from the chaff. So the chaff, meaning the less, the stalk of the wheat, or the less good, will fall away, and the wheat will be retained. So the cream of the crop will rise to the top. There's a jump around lyric here. So that's where I think things are going with that. I think that the trade availability is going to get higher. It should mean higher competition for pricing and lot pricing. If having a new home is more affordable, how does that affect lot pricing? Does it go up? Are vacant lots getting snapped up? And builders' capacity might increase. Housing starts versus reality. Reading the headlines. Housing starts versus reality. So, CMHC, which is CMHC reported a 5.6 increase in housing starts in 2025, but that same year marked the worst condo market since 1991. Sales plunging from 95% from a 2021 peak. How do we understand what the market is actually doing for someone planning a custom build? Really interesting. So why? So is there, I mean, especially in major centers, people are going away from condos. Now, what does this mean? What does this mean about what people are looking for in their housing? Are they looking for more space? Are they looking for outdoor space? Are they looking for more exposure and less of an urban setting? Are they looking for, yeah, what are we looking for? So I had heard that I was speaking with a building official, excuse me, in my town a few months ago, and he said that we had more permits issued than he could ever remember in the last part of 2025, which I thought was super interesting. But I think it was mostly multifamily, because most of our custom home builders that I've spoken to are slow. So I think it was more multifamily, because as we know, the government, at least local and federally, is making it more appealing to build more units. So at least in my town, interestingly enough, I should mention this, that typically in a planning department, you have what's called an OCP, or an official community plan, and that governs what parts of your city or town or county, which parts they want to densify and which parts they want to leave as somewhat rural areas with larger lots and fewer and less density. So in my town and in all of my province, in fact, now on any lot, basically any lot of certain zoning, which is basically all of our downtown core, you can build up to 4 units without having to go through any type of variance. Even they basically reclassified all of the infill housing lots as multifamily lots. So in an effort to densify and ease the housing crisis. So what's really interesting about that is that now you have a regular residential lot with one house on it. Any lot, without going through rezoning, can get densified into up to 4 units. So that means that your neighbor could tear down his house and put 4 units on there. Now, I don't know about you, but I live on a regular house on a regular street, and if my neighbor sold his house and put 4 lots on it, I would be less than happy, and that's an understatement. We live on a pretty quiet street, and having 4 units all of a sudden, potentially like 8 vehicles parking next to our house, and having people in the yards all the time and looking down into our yards. We have 1-story buildings on either side of us. That does not seem like a really appealing proposition to me. Now, luckily it hasn't happened, but it has happened to a couple of my clients where they have basically 4 units beside them, where it used to be just a single family dwelling. So it's tricky out there. It's really tricky. So what does this all mean for planning a custom home build? I think that, interest rates I heard yesterday, they're slated to maybe go back up a quarter, like 25 points. So, for the next couple of quarters. And that is not great, but it's real, it's real. So it basically just means that we're maybe looking at a stagnant custom home market. So what that means for someone planning a custom home build is that likely in a market like this where it's slow, you likely have more competition for trades. You'll hopefully get better trade pricing, You may, though, given that, as we talked about earlier, the softwood lumber tariffs, that you may be paying a little bit more for your lumber specifically, and other products that are affected by those tariffs. You may also see, but you may make, up for that with the trade competition, with the trade pricing, if it is indeed slow. Or just get into a condo. Sales are plunging 95%. And that's kind of what we saw with the housing crisis, is that maybe we overbuilt in the condo department. We overbuilt the number of units and misappropriated or misidentified the type of units that people were looking for. So from a custom build, I don't know if too much changes. I think you might get a better labor pricing, but on the other hand, labor market is trying to keep up with inflation, and everything just keeps going up and up and up and up. So you're going to have to try to straddle the line between how bad people want to work versus how much money they need to make to live. And that money they need to make to live is much, much higher than it used to be. Everybody's rates are going up to try to keep up and try to say, well, if a loaf of bread is going to cost me $8, or a gallon or a 4 liter of milk is going to cost me $8 or whatever, then I'm going to have to raise my rates. And everybody's raising their rates, so everybody's raising their rates. And it really is kind of a recipe. And the crappy thing is that if you're in I'm self-employed, so I can raise rates whenever I need to, but if you're stuck in, say, a union job or a job that is provincially or federally regulated, where you can't just say, well, we need to add 5% onto our wage, or 10% or 15% or whatever. If you're not in that world, then you're stuck. Everything else is going up around you, and you're stuck where you're at, and you can't renegotiate. You can't, at least in the self-employment world and trade pricing, you could raise your rates if you need to and try to keep up a little bit. So what's really interesting is knowing all of this and knowing that it's more expensive to build, you may get more competitive trade pricing, but it's probably still going to be pretty expensive, is that locally there are expanding flexibilities for communities to reduce or waive development charges on more types of housing. So what that means, because provincially they're able to access some of these federal infrastructure funds. So what may end up happening is that development cost charges may come down. Now, development cost charges, those are DCCs, and what they are is essentially the costs to put in infrastructure. So let's say you live in a well-established neighborhood, and you want to do a renovation. You want to upgrade your electrical service size. Say you have 100 or 125 amps, and you want to go to 200 amps. Well, if the city doesn't have any, that's normally not a problem. But if the city or your electrical supplier, doesn't have any more power available to them to give you, you will likely have to pay these development cost charges for the city to upgrade. In some cases, it could be, I've heard of, the entire street, the infrastructure for the entire street, so that they have the available power that you need. So that's the tricky bit. So that's what it's called, the development cost charge. You'll see it with electricity. You'll see it with sometimes sewer, sometimes water. And these may be charges on top of your initial building permit. And we definitely see it with electricity as people are upgrading their electrical services. So the tricky bit is that sometimes these development cost charges can be like in the tens of thousands of dollars, and you're not getting, your electricity doesn't change. It's not like your house, all you're asking for is an additional 100 amps of service, because maybe you want a hot tub or something down the road, or maybe you have an increased plug load or something like that. But what you're not getting that much out of your tens of thousands of dollars that these development costs. So knowing that these are prohibitive for people, some governments, some provincial governments are accessing federal funds and they're waiving or reducing development cost charges. So that's in an effort to stimulate housing. But mark my words, this will happen, that we're building so much housing and the Canadian government has put a cap on immigration, essentially, that things are going to slow down and there are going to be far more units available than they're able to sell. So by nature of supply and demand, these units are going to decrease in price. So those are four pretty specific issues that are facing the construction industry right now. And let's take a look now at a couple of my favorite. We're going to take a look at a couple. We're going to take a look at a couple case studies, and I love these. If you are watching and you have a question for me, hit me up in the chat or barge in and raise your hand or something. So I ask my students to do. So just hit me. Just do it. So, all right. So this person says, I need to vent, and I'm curious what some people's experiences were like with contractors. I had to hire a new contractor for my kitchen project, and it's been a very stressful experience. My kitchen is getting a full makeover, and I know it's going to be a bumpy journey. And I know they probably say new. I knew it was going to be a bumpy journey. So let's maybe start there. Why do we always assume that it's going to be bad? Is that because it is always bad? Well, my experience is that it does not have to be bad. But right away we brace ourselves. I hear this all the time. People say, well, it always goes over budget. Well, it's always a crappy experience. Oh, I'd never do it again. It's terrible. It doesn't have to be this way. So I didn't realize it was going to be this irritating. Point number one, workers spilled coffee on the subfloor, barely cleaned it up, and placed plywood floor over it when still wet. The coffee even went down the floorboards. That sounds like down the floorboards. Sounds like maybe between the subfloor. And dripped onto my washer and dryer in the basement, presumably through a light fixture or through the ceiling. It's a lot of coffee, big coffee. That sucks. That's, yeah. Don't put things on the floor, for one. I never understood. I mean, I've seen some products where guys have, it's like a cup holder that clips onto a stud, and they can just set there. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what it is about construction workers like carpenters. I've been a carpenter on the tools. I'm not sure what it is exactly, but that makes people bring their garbage into a home and not bring it out again. Not bring their garbage into a home and not put it in its proper receptacle. And also it's seemingly addiction to like coffee and or like chips and Monster, Red Bull, whatever that carpenters have. Maybe it's just working on the tools or something, but it just seems like everybody brings those cups or cans onto the site. That sucks though. It must have been a big coffee. No one cleans up after themselves. When the dust from the sheetrock crept into my dining room, no one vacuumed it up. It turned the bottom half of my cabinet chalk white. They left the door to the back porch open, so now that whole room is covered in gray dust. I will say two things. Clients hate when trades don't clean up. They just hate it. It feels so disrespectful to them. It just feels like nobody gives a rip about their house or about them. They figure like, oh, you do it. And it's, ugh, they just hate it. So I definitely empathize. I definitely feel for this person. That's a real bummer. but the second part of that is that drywall mud is nearly impossible to get off. It's drywall mud is not nearly impossible to get off. It's easy to get off. It's nearly impossible to keep out of certain areas. It's like impossible to keep, even if you're taping, like if you're taping off a section in an area with poly, somehow drywall mud drywall mud, like as in sanding, like fine, that it's so fine that dust, it's like flour, and it just will find its way like throughout the house, and you think that you've cleaned it all, and then you'll wake up and it just floats in the air, and you can't sweep it, you sweep it and you turn into a dusted cookie. So I mean, they left the door to the back porch, so now that whole room is covered in gray dust. Yeah, you got to be mindful of that stuff. Like if you're drywalling and you're in someone's house, like you got to do your proper hoarding. You got to do your proper, can't leave doors open and stuff like that, because that stuff gets everywhere. There's joint compound and spackle smeared on the floor and wooden door frames. It just seems like they're being. I mean, one thing that I have noticed when I've done drywall work is that I always just keep like a towel in my pocket, so that if I'm doing or a spackle even, I just keep a damp towel in my pocket, hanging out of my pocket, so that I can get it. If I drop it, I just pick it up right away. Now, if you're getting drywall mud on a subfloor, sometimes it's actually easier later on to just come back with a hard trowel and scrape it up, and then sweep that stuff up. So I mean, they may say that they'll come back later and clean it all up, but people hate walking through their house and they feel so disrespectful. One of the workers didn't want to use my toilet in the basement, which is extremely close to the kitchen where they're working. So the contractor brought a porta potty to my property. Before I signed the contract, I said I wasn't going to pay for the porta potty since they had permission to use the one in the basement. That's fair. That's a great way to save costs. If you've got a 3-month project, it'll cost about $125 to get the porta potty delivered and picked up. So that's $250, plus usually around $150 a month. So if it's 3 months, that's $450 plus $250. Yeah, so like $700. I get why you wouldn't want to pay $700 when they can use the toilet next to the kitchen. Not 2 days after the potty was delivered, I had a random person come onto my property to use the toilet. Yeah. Let's just say I scared the crap, hopefully not literally, out of him, and he ran off. Even my neighbor yelled at him. The contractor had to buy a lock for the porta potty. Listen, the old adage, don't throw stones if you live in a glass house. I have done that. I have used a porta potty, but it was, I'll say, kind of an emergency. I have definitely used not my porta potty, but yeah, like I said, it was an emergency. The contractor had to buy, even my neighbor yelled at him. The contractor had to buy a lock for the porta potty. Some of the workers have helped themselves to my water. I mean, like out of the tap? I wouldn't think that would be a big deal. My back porch is freezing, so I've been storing some drinks and food out there, like a second freezer. I may come off as an a-hole for this, but no one asked if they can take my water, and they wasted a few bottles too. Oh, I see, like water bottles. Yeah, that's not cool. That's not cool. Just grabbing a water bottle I mean, sometimes they'll think that it might be for them, but you still got to ask. I am barely given notice when the workers are coming back. The contractor will tell me the painters are working Wednesday and Thursday, but then they work one day and no one tells me they're not coming back on Thursday. So I just wasted a morning waiting around. They want to schedule someone to come on Saturday. When I say no, they get all pissy with me. Ooh, this is a great one. So this highlights a lot of the communication issues that I find that builders have with clients. Some builders will get an air of like, well, you should just be happy that we're coming. So doesn't matter. I mean, I had a friend who was having a renovation, and she was asleep at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. Builders didn't tell her they were coming, and they just like were cruising by her window, and she was asleep. She woke up like, I don't know what condition she sleeps in, but imagine like the dude just like walked by her window, and she was like freaking out, like, ah. And yeah, I mean, you've got to, as a contractor, you've got to communicate. You've got to communicate more than you think you need to. So when you tell the client that the painters are working Wednesday and Thursday, and then they show up Wednesday and not Thursday, then sometimes people get a little upset with that, because every day, here's how clients look at it. They look at it is that every day that person doesn't come is another day added onto the schedule. So the best thing I've been on site where there's like 3 different trades working. There's exterior people, there's someone in the basement, and there's someone up top. And clients love it. They feel like their time is being maximized, because oftentimes clients, they're in uncomfortable positions. They're in uncomfortable spots. Either they're living in the basement where they don't want to live in if they're doing a renovation, or if they're building a home, they've likely sold their previous home and they're living in a rental or something for a year while their home gets built. So they feel like when they show up onto site, every day there's nobody there is another day they have to live in this godforsaken rental. So they hate it. They absolutely hate it. And so if you can communicate and say, listen, the painters aren't able to come on Thursday as they thought they would, but they'd like to come on Saturday. Is that okay? They'd really like to get this knocked out. And then, but you also got to understand that, business days are Monday through Friday, and having somebody come around on Saturday doesn't work for everybody. So I ask a question but anyways, so all this to say that if here we've highlighted 2 things. I made a video about this. The 2 things that clients absolutely hate about the building process is, one thing is when people are messy and they feel so disrespected. And the second thing is that when there's an empty job site, they feel like nobody cares, and they feel like that's another day that they're going to have to live in their basement. So contractors, you've got to communicate, and the best thing you can do is have as many people there as your project will allow. I ask a question about needing measurements for something so I can make an order, and we'll talk about that later. As of now, I don't even know if anyone is coming on Friday to do any work. This is just a me issue, but my dog and I have been growing restless, and I'm personally getting cabin fever too. I'm not happy about all the cleaning I have to do because dust is everywhere downstairs. Sounds like this person is living downstairs while the renovation is going on upstairs in the kitchen. And this is, as I mentioned, people get it's uncomfortable whether you're living in a rental and you're living out of boxes or something while your place is being built, or you're living in the downstairs, or you're crashing with a friend while your renovation gets done. Every day that you don't see people on site is another day that you feel like you are wasting, and they start to get really restless and really uncomfortable, and they're bleeding, they're hemorrhaging money, and they just hate it. And if builders aren't communicating, that absolutely adds another layer of complexity, and adds another layer of, what the hell are we doing here? Like, I'm so uncomfortable, and this person doesn't seem to care that I have to do this for another week or 2 weeks or whatever. And that's really and that's what drives people crazy. They're already stressed. They're already hemorrhaging money, and they're already uncomfortable. They're sleeping in a bed that isn't theirs. They're living in a place that isn't theirs, and they just want it to be over. And if you're not communicating, it's just like a slap in the face. That is how it is. that is how, that's how they feel. So someone here had a really good comment. It said, sounds like a highly unprofessional crew with a lack of attention to details. I would agree. They could be masking off areas to prevent dust. I would also agree. Did you talk to the project manager / supervisor early in the process about this stuff? I'd set pretty hard rules about conduct in my house. I'll tell you, that's a great suggestion. This can be sometimes clients, when clients and builders get together, they're each judging one another, and they're judging one another from an expectations perspective. The builder is maybe not even consciously, but subconsciously, the builder is saying, what kind of standards are these people going to hold me to? And the client is going to look at the builder and say, what kind of standards are these? What are these guys going to take my money and run? And they both want to get what they want, but this person has a great point that you absolutely need to talk to the project manager, superintendent early in the process about this stuff. Sometimes it's clients that just don't know. They don't really think ahead and think, okay, well, they're going to be standing drywall, or drywall mud, so I need to ask them to mask it off. What they like is for someone to show them the consideration to mask off those areas, and say, well, I'm assuming they don't want to get drywall dust all over this, so I'm going to mask it off. So, person said, did you talk to the project manager super earlier in this process about this stuff? Absolutely. And if you want help with this, I would set pretty hard rules about conduct in my house. Yeah, it's fine, especially at the early stages. That's when you set expectations. That's when so that you can refer, if they're not being met, you can refer back and say, listen, this is what we agreed on. So this person says, read your contract, assuming you have one, sit down with whoever's in charge and tell them this stuff ends today, and you need clear expectations moving forward. Great suggestion. Expectation management is the number one thing that builders stink at, I think. And it's the number one assumption that clients make. And they're often not aligned. The contractor, this is the original poster, the contractor asked if I was happy with how things are moving along. And I said I was irritated with the amount of dust that was all over and not being cleaned up. He said, yeah, that's going to happen. The next time he comes to my house, I will show the photos I've been taking and let him know I am not thrilled with how things are going. Yeah, that's not a great answer. If a client brings that to me, I would say, oh, you know what? I really apologize. I did not realize the guys hadn't masked that off. We're going to mask that off right away, and let me know if it happens again. You can get you can get zip doors within poly so that you can mask off certain areas, and then there's like a zipper door so that you can, or there's a flap door so that you can get through that space if you need to, but dust doesn't move very easily through. And another poster said, if they conceal an entry into the kitchen to the rest of the house, that's all you can do. We still had some come through, but I didn't expect them to clean other areas of the house from the dust. It's literally a construction zone. Yeah, I mean, that's to a point, that's true, but they should be able to put certain precautions in place. I had a roofing contractor get peed off and refused to give me a quote because as he was getting started, another contractor I was getting a bid from showed up. He accused me of trying to play them off of each other and stormed off. Dude had shown up 25 minutes late to our appointment. If he'd have been on time, he'd have finished before the next one showed up. Like, bro, I work all day. I have narrow appointment window available after I get off before end of day. Besides, who doesn't get multiple bids for a new roof? Yeah. I had a drywaller once get upset because I had given him, it was like a $5,000 job. It was small potatoes. but I had sent a full house, which was like a 20 something $1,000 job. I had sent a full house for him to quote. And so he's doing the $5,000 job that I had awarded him. And I come in and say, "Hey, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah." We're chatting. And he goes, who ended up getting that house that you sent me? And I said, "Oh, it was the other company." And he was like, "Oh, I see how it's going. Yeah, you give me these crappy little jobs, and and I don't get the bigger stuff. I see how it's going." And I was like, "Excuse me?" I was like, "You were $5,000 more than the other company on that bigger job." And I told him, like, my responsibility is to the client. Why would I pay $5,000 more for the same job? My responsibility is to the client to save the money. I'm not just going to take your bid because you're better. So, I mean, I don't know. That's the last time I worked with that guy. So we're just closing in on our hour together. We'll probably do more case studies. I like these because, as I mentioned earlier, it is a really good way to understand people's problems and the problems they've had in the past, and how we can avoid those in the future. So my name is Aaron from Albatross Academy, and if you're not clear on what I do, I help homeowners navigate their projects. And if you don't have, it's basically like having a construction, I'll hesitantly call myself an expert, but having a construction expert on your side so that you don't have these same experiences that many of these people do. So I think it's in my mind, admitting full bias here, but I think it's an absolute critical part and critical resource to have at your disposal. And whether you take some of my courses, I have a how to hire the right builder course that's coming out really quickly that actually walks you through the process step by step of hiring the right builder so that you don't run into the same issues that these people do. Giving you the right manageable expectations for what builders should be doing and how to implement the right contract structure for your project as well. So that's it for me. Thanks for joining us. I'm Aaron from Albatross Academy, and I'll see you next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific. Have a